If history has proven anything, it's that Turkey and Greece will never get along. Whether it's the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Turks, or the Ottoman Empire and the Greek Rebellion, it appears that while Turkey and Greece might be a delicious combination at the dinner table, they're a less satisfactory one at the negotiating table. In fact, both states being NATO members and almost being forced to get along have done really nothing to stop the conflict between the two. As the Wall Street Journal reports, on September 14th of this year, tensions between the two nations have been escalating recently, when a Turkish fleet sailed into rightfully Greek waters in the Aegean in order to mine numerous natural gas enclaves around numerous Greek islands. Obviously, this upset the Greek government greatly, who have demanded that the EU take drastic action to stop Turkey from intruding upon waters that they consider rightfully theirs. Unfortunately, the Turkish side sees things a bit differently. They consider the international waters around the area to be rightfully Turkish and believe that they should have a right to sail through them whenever they want. Ultimately, with signs of this conflict escalating and with the EU at a loss for what to do, it's necessary that we ask ourselves today's question. Should the EU levy sanctions on Turkey? And unfortunately, upon closer inspection, we can see that the answer is a clear and resounding no, because it will lead to a geopolitical nightmare. More specifically, because of three major reasons. First, conflicting loyalties. Second, grave consequences. And third, the possibility of armed conflict. But first, geopolitics around the Balkans are a political nightmare. And unfortunately, this will make it especially challenging for the EU to send any form of meaningful help to Greece. The New York Times reports on September 5th of this year that Turkey is a member of NATO. Greece is a member of both the EU and NATO, and countries surrounding both of these nations are members of all sorts of varying alliances and groups. This makes it especially tricky to levy any form of sanctions on Turkey, especially because the majority of EU nations are members of NATO as well. NATO countries aren't really supposed to attack each other, believe it or not, and levying sanctions on another NATO nation could be seen as an act of aggression and would take any EU countries levying the sanctions into a murky legal gray area that the EU really should not be entering at the moment. Levying sanctions would make it particularly challenging to resolve this conflict, especially due to these conflicting loyalties among Turkey and Greece. But of course, it's not just the loyalties of Turkey and Greece that are at play. The Guardian reports on September 5th of this year that many EU countries have conflicting loyalties as to whether they're backing Turkey or Greece in the conflict. Germany has already come out in favor of Turkey, while nations like France and Spain remain on the Greek side. Clearly, this would make it especially difficult for the EU to reach any form of consensus when it comes to which sanctions it should levy on Turkey, if any at all. These conflicting loyalties will prove especially difficult in the next few months, and will make it even harder for the EU to take really any meaningful action, including levying sanctions against Turkey. But it's not just these conflicting loyalties that are causing issues among Turkey and Greece. It's also the fact that many of these sanctions, even if the EU were to levy them, wouldn't really be meaningful in any major way. They simply wouldn't be effective. Reuters reports on September 5th of this year that too many sanctions on Turkey could allow Turkey to lead the way in a migrant influx that would take over from the previous 2015 migrant conflict and would send Europe reeling. Essentially, the majority of Syrian refugees are stopped in Turkey, where they're essentially bottlenecked from continuing into Europe. Turkey is using these refugees as a bargaining token. They know that if Europe were to do anything that would upset Turkey, they could let all these refugees cross into Europe unopposed. Obviously, this would be very bad news for Europe, who are still reeling from the 2015 Syrian migrant crisis and have not fully settled these migrants in Europe. If Turkey were to allow these hundreds of thousands of migrants to cross into the EU, it would be doom for every major EU nation. There would be a massive influx of migrants, and it would further destabilize already destabilized EU nations. Ultimately, for the EU, the risk is not worth it. Furthermore, these sanctions lie in a very murky legal area that means levying them may have no real effect. Al Jazeera reports on September 3rd of this year that international waters can be a very tricky situation, especially in the Aegean Sea, where Turkey feels that its international border isn't being respected, and Greece feels that Turkey is impeding on its rights by the day. Turkey doesn't really own an area of the Aegean Sea that's equivalent to its size, which is the way that maritime law works in the majority of the world. Essentially, Turkey thinks they're being cheated, and Greece thinks they're not. Turkey might be able to make a sufficient case against the EU to take them to numerous courts around the world, and unfortunately, the EU does not need a major legal battle right now. Ultimately, this may levy the sanctions ineffective to begin with, and therefore, it's unreasonable and unlikely that the EU ought to levy sanctions on Turkey. But again, it's not just that these sanctions will be ineffective or that there's conflicting loyalties at play. In fact, levying these sanctions could lead to one of the gravest consequences of all: armed conflict. The Times of Greece reports in a poll taken just yesterday that 50% of Greeks support the use of armed conflict to stop Turkish infringement on their international waters. If the EU levies sanctions, this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back for Turkey, and it may lead to an armed conflict throughout the Aegean and the Balkans, something that neither region needs right now. Furthermore, the New York Times reports in another article published just yesterday that unfortunately the EU has already begun anticipating an armed response. Levying sanctions could simply exacerbate this conflict and make it harder to reach a peaceful resolution. So, when we look back on today's question, should the EU levy sanctions on Turkey? We can see that the answer is a clear and resounding no, because it'll lead to a geopolitical nightmare in three major areas. First, due to conflicting loyalties. Second, because the sanctions might just be ineffective to begin with. And third, because of the possibility of an armed conflict. Thank you.